Hello, Dr. Clay. I'm Micaiah Carter, and I'm about to be sharing what I learned this semester in criminology. So, who I am, again, Micaiah Carter, as you know, class of 22, sociology major, and I'm a philosophy and English double minor from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 225. But yeah, so the reason why I took this class is to learn more from you specifically academically, because you really push us in class to be articulate and to be able to back up and explain what we mean when we say things, and also beyond to someone that I can look up to, like as a mentor of sorts, and just learn a lot from the experiences and the wisdom that you impart on us during class. So that's really why I was interested in taking this course, because you were teaching it. So my final project, the crime that I chose, is called Operation Varsity Blues. It's frequently referred to as that, and it's basically I'm going to be focusing on Lori Loughlin and her part that she played in the college admission scandal, but of course, many different individuals played a large role in this scandal. It was a nationwide scandal across many different colleges and universities, but I'm just going to be focusing, on Lori Loughlin, since she was a celebrity and got a lot of press due to her involvement in the scheme. So, what actually happened? Here are the facts. So, this scandal was when a lot of rich and famous people paid money to have their children's, college acceptances altered in order to give them a better chance to be accepted to their dream schools. So for some people, this looked like paying individuals to take SAT tests for their children, to doctor their scores. But in Laughlin's case, she actually bribed an athletic coach to have her kids signed on as athletic recruits, even though they had no athletic prowess at all. So, of course, one of the most high profile sets of parents were Full House actress Lori Loughlin and her husband Massimo Giannelli. So this scandal was actually one of the largest college admission schemes that the Department of Justice has ever prosecuted. As I mentioned, it spanned many different prestigious colleges in the nation, and it ran really deep. So the criminal complaint alleged that Loughlin and her husband paid bribes totaling about $500,000 to the University of Southern California crew team to basically sign their children on as recruits, even though none of their daughters participated in rowing at all. So it is believed that many of the students involved were not aware of the false circumstances under which they were entering college. In Lori Loughlin's case, her daughters were aware of the falsified pretenses under which they were supposed to be entering college. So the facts continue. What happened versus what the media portrayed. So through her actions, Laughlin aggravated already existing inequalities in society. Laughlin is a well-off white woman who's very privileged, and a lot of people who had to work super hard to even get a chance to even be recruited by an athletic program such as the one at USC, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. She took away the chances of deserving people who had to come over a lot of obstacles to put her already privileged children who admitted that they didn't care about school in the program. So she aggravated those already existing disparities in society by giving her already rich kids who already had 20 times better chances than anybody else to get into high schools and even be able to afford those schools due to just rich people connections. She took that away from people who actually had to work hard their whole lives to even get a minute chance. After Laughlin's oldest daughter was admitted to USC as an athletic recruit, Laughlin informed her youngest daughter to not tell her guidance counselor that USC was also her first choice, because Laughlin thought that that would give them reason to meddle into her daughter's profile and kind of make sure that she was academically able to even get into USC, and she thought that that would like kind of put a red flag. So she told her youngest daughter, don't even mention to the guidance counselors that this is where you want to go, because she knew what she was doing was wrong and she was afraid of getting caught. But what the media portrayed, once again, she is a white woman. She's a beloved Full House actress. A lot of people thought that Laughlin was simply acting out of love for her children. Like, hey, if you had this amount of money, if you had this power to get to get your kids into these top schools, who wouldn't, use what they have to give their kids what they need. But further, a lot of people also argue that Laughlin undermined the potential and accomplishments of her daughters, basically by stating that she knew that they weren't going to be able to get in the schools on their own merit, and basically kind of made them seem as though they were incapable of achieving high amounts. But in reality, it's a reason why she did bribe those coaches. Her daughters, like I said, they admitted on social media that they didn't really care about school, and they weren't going to be able to get into the school on their own. So I don't really agree with that point, but let's continue nonetheless. So what the outcome was. So both Laughlin and her husband initially pleaded not guilty to what they were charged with, which was conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud for Laughlin, but she eventually pleaded guilty because the judge basically told her, if you continue to plead not guilty and it's fine that you actually are guilty, that they were not going to be merciful to her. So she eventually did plead guilty to conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud, but her husband pleaded guilty to the same charge with the addition of honest services wire and mail fraud. So Laughlin was sentenced to 2 months in federal prison, and after she was actually released at the end of last year. She still has to go through 2 years of supervised release, during which she must complete at least 100 hours of community service, as well as pay a $150,000 fine. And her husband was sentenced to 3 additional months than her, 3 more months, so 5 months in prison, 2 years of the supervised release, but he also had to complete 250 hours of community service due to his extra count of that honest services wire mail fraud, and pay a $250,000 fine. So let's apply it to some of the concepts that we learned this semester. So the first one is going to be the criminologist perspective. So looking at rational choice theory. If I was a criminologist, I would be interested in finding out what caused the cost to outweigh the benefits for Laughlin. Like I said, she's rich. You might not be able to get into the most prestigious schools on academic merit, but she probably could have pulled some strings in another way that was not necessarily illegal to get her kids in. And her name was tarnished in the media. She actually had to go to jail. So what made sending your kids that didn't even care about school to a prestigious school worth it, in order to lose so many partnerships, go to jail, be tarnished, go through psychological turmoil, I'm sure? Like, what caused her to believe that the risks were worth it in this situation? And further, I would be interested in on the offender specifics. What exact actions were taken to ensure success? What exactly did she do logistically to make sure that she wouldn't get caught? You know, kind of like how she told her daughter not to alert the guidance counselors. I would be interested in other methods and measures that she took to kind of ensure her success, of being a criminal. So structuring crime and criminality, what led Laughlin to commit the crime? And how did she determine the logistics of the crime? Was it out of need or opportunity? What exactly drove her to want to do something like this? Because it did pose great risk. Fraud is a really heinous crime. Trait theory. Psychodynamic aspects of personality. So possibly did Laughlin have an overactive superego, causing her to consider the well-being of her children a little too much? Once again, as a criminologist, I would just be trying to understand what pushed her to these limits. So maybe she was just like a super mom and she really, really wanted the best for her children more than a normal person. So she went to kind of abnormal lengths. Are there any environmental factors? Did she grow up seeing fraud and deception in her environment and maybe started to believe that that was normal and acceptable, especially for people who look like her and who have money like her? In social structural theory, did Lawson possibly grow up with any socioeconomic disadvantages that pushed her to choose a life of crime? And then growing up as a child star, we can kind of already understand that to be not true, at least from my perspective. But, maybe her crime was the cause of poverty, income inequality, or hopelessness. Did she feel like she had to do it in order to survive? But again, I don't necessarily think that's true, but as a criminologist, you would probably consider many different avenues to try to decipher what leads people to do the things that they do. So the next one is going to be from the perspective of a jury member. So debating her innocence, I would want to know, did Laughlin and her husband have a fear of losing respect and a fear of punishment? Or did they go into it kind of heady and boastful and kind of assume that they were just simply going to get away with it because they were white and rich, excuse me. Offender specifics, how far did Laughlin go to ensure that she would not be caught? And as we know, she did take measures for her fraud to be concealed, which to me as a jury member would make her seem even more guilty because you knew what you were doing was wrong because you took measures to conceal it from being found out. And were these crimes committed on the basis of economic need or lack? I could see if you truly had no other way to be successful or no other way to get education for your children, maybe that would give me a little bit more sympathy as a juror. But literally, as I said, they could have went to almost any other school and paid a full way. You know, they didn't really need scholarships or anything like that. They didn't even probably have to work hard. They could have hired someone to write their admissions paper. You know what I'm saying? Like, there were so many other avenues they could have taken before doing this. So as a jury member, I would not have much remorse for her. For trait theory, neurophysiology, structure-wise, maybe Laughlin had more activity in the impulse center of her brain, causing her to make kind of not smart decisions, or maybe she could be easily influenced by other people and basically be driven to make bad decisions. Maybe she had an abnormal amount of hormones in her that caused her to act like erratically or aggressively, once again leading her down criminal path and genetics. I mean, maybe they were inherited criminal traits that could have pushed Laughlin to do this. Looking at social structural theory and the social disorganization theory, maybe she came from a chaotic background since crime is linked to neighborhood ecological characteristics. And she grew up kind of rough, which once again, after doing research on her, this stuff is not true, but perhaps, she grew up in an environment where she saw deception and fraud, or she saw white people getting away with things that were illegal, which caused her to think that she wouldn't be caught due to her race and status. Collective efficacy. Maybe she was a part of a cohesive, rich, white community in California, with a high level of social control and likely a high demand to kind of parade a certain facade and having your kids go to the top schools. So maybe she was so much influenced by her collective community that she was driven to do these crimes so that she could kind of keep up with the status quo within her social group. So finally, we're going to look at it from a victim's perspective with rational choice once again. As a victim, I would want to know what made her weigh out the cost of benefits of the crime and still decide to commit it anyway. So in this scenario, I identified the victims to be the larger academic community, those students who maybe applied to USC that year or were hopeful crew team recruits at USC and were not able to get a spot in the institution due to people like Laughlin's children taking those spots that simply they weren't deserving of. I would want to know what made her think it's okay to take spots from people who actually want to learn and actually need USC on their resume, maybe for their life trajectory. What would make you think that's okay to put your already rich and privileged kids even more ahead of everybody else in a very unfair way? I would even want to know even more of the specifics, the little things and protections that Laughlin purposefully took in order to ensure that she was going to be successful with her crimes. I would want to know every little thing that she did in order to protect herself, because as a victim, honestly, it would make her seem worse and worse in my eyes to know all the ways that she tried to cover her tracks. In structuring criminality, Laughlin had a lack of personal factors, maybe, in environmental conditions that led her to commit a criminal act. So once again, she had a lot of money, so maybe, she felt that obviously she felt her daughters were not capable of getting in school, and she felt that she had no other choice to ensure them prestigious schooling, and she kind of felt that her environment pushed her to do that. looking at trait theory, genetics, I mean, she didn't come from criminal parents, and that she shouldn't have inherited any criminal tendencies. I know it doesn't necessarily work exactly like that, but that's not an excuse she could really use. She didn't come from a rough background. She didn't come from a bad neighborhood. She didn't grow up seeing crime. She kind of led a privileged life from pretty early on, with her like being a young adult, like television star. So I wouldn't really believe any excuses that she might put forth regarding genetics. If I was a victim and looking at survival and behavior, was she driven to do this by the need to ensure survival of her offspring? Once again, I would think not. They were going to be fine with or without USC, and they both have seemed to withdrawn from the university amid the scandal anyway. So once again, it just kind of seemed to be a senseless and trivial matter. They could have went to any other prestigious school or even gotten themselves into USC, not by academic merit, but maybe donating money and kind of just swaying people in that way. That's not necessarily illegal, but more so just kind of like shady. But she decided to go the full like criminal route. So I wouldn't have much remorse for her in that regard anyway. And finally, looking at social structural theory for the last time, maybe she committed her crime due to an attempt to relieve a sense of strain, and she has to resort to fraud. Maybe she was just so messed up, looking at her colleagues and their children. Maybe they went to Harvard and Yale, and she's looking at her daughters probably barely getting by in high school, and like, in order to keep up with this social circle, she felt so strained by the fact that her children just weren't achieving the same things, and she felt that she had to resort to that in order to keep up her image. And maybe, Laughlin was a member of the lower class as a youth, and she didn't really have legitimate options. Even as an adult, there were no legitimate options for her, and she was forced to resort to crime. But as we saw and as we know, there were many other legitimate options that she could have taken in order to ensure her daughter's education. It might have been at a prestigious school based on academic merit, like I said, but they could have got education, a very good education, that still so many Americans are not afforded due to the amount of money that they had. But she chose to resort to crime anyway. So, going to the conclusion here. This is just a picture. The girl is holding a sign outside her criminal trial saying, "Lori, please pay my tuition." And then the next girl says, "After you get out of prison, of course." So what the solutions could be: rehabilitation, punishment, crime prevention, and healing. So rehabilitating or punishing the offender. For Laughlin, I would want her to be forced to listen to victim stories, forced to be listening to those kids who were deferred or denied acceptance into USC that year. And who knows what could have been if her and many other parents did not falsify their kids' admission acceptances. I would want her to hear how that directly affected the life trajectories, of people who were not admitted due to their fraud. So I would want her to have to listen to that and, have to sit with that. I would also want her to donate money yearly to a scholarship fund for deserving and specifically minority students to do a small acts in order to try to right her wrongs and kind of give back to those inequalities that she really exacerbated by committing her crime. So as far as preventing similar crimes in the future, I feel like the athletic department needs to do a deeper dive into confirmation of the recruits and making sure that the people who are on roster are actually people who are athletes in a specific sport and not giving so much jurisdiction to just like athletic directors. I would think like the higher ups in the greater university administration would need to like double check and triple check what the athletic director is doing and approving, because they could be faulty in on these schemes as they were. And also as far as like ACT, they need more strict standardized cheating preventions. I know they already go to great lengths and you can't completely eradicate all chances of cheating, but if people are being paid to literally like change people's answers, something is wrong in the system there that is going to continue to aggravate inequalities. And standardized testing is a whole nother thing, but it's already very biased. And if rich people are able to have even more of an advantage in that realm, they really need to look into that. And finally, assisting victims with healing. I would think they would need to refill the falsified spots with deserving crew athletes and those people who really were trying to get a rowing scholarship. They definitely need to refill and maybe even add more money in the budget to add on even more people who actually want to do it and who are actually deserving to go to the school. So finally, thank you, Dr. Clay, as always. You know, I feel about you. I'm very thankful to be able to just kind of learn from you. And really, honestly, looking back at my time at Xavier, if it wasn't for you, I really don't know if I would still be here, like, quite honestly. So thank you again. I'm looking forward to next semester with capstone and everything like that. And I know we'll be in touch soon. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation.